The quarterfinals for the FCS is here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SlasherU. I'm your host, Christian Rao, here with my co-host, Steve Beck. And we're going to break down the Elite Eight, the final 8 teams left in the FCS playoffs here. And all 8 of these teams are the 8 teams that received the bye by the committee. Every team that played in the first round is no longer in the playoffs. Every single team that received the bye got the win last week. Steve, if anything, that shows that the committee did something right. You'd have to give credit to them where credit is due.
I absolutely. I mean, I think, I would have some misgivings about where they seeded some of these teams,
Sure.
but I mean, overall, I think right. I think they had the right teams. There was a lot of grumbling about teams like Incarnate Word, and even Holy Cross getting a seed, but I think they've proven to date that there's a reason why they got those seeds. You can't have every team from the best conference be seeded. This isn't the NCAA FBS rankings. I mean, you actually have to kind of spread it out and kind of give kudos to teams that had special years. So, yeah, I'm really happy with the field. There's been some really great performances. There's been some kind of performances. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I'm glad you brought up the seeding because there was an interesting article on NCAA.com getting ready for the quarterfinals here. And Stan Becken from NCAA.com put out an article that said re-ranking the 8 FCS teams before the 2022 playoff quarterfinals. Now, this is his thoughts. This is not a re-ranking or reseeding. They don't do that with the playoffs. However, it was just very interesting watching him re-rank the teams and his thoughts behind them. So I'm going to give you the order of what they were ranked, and I want to hear your thoughts on it because I know you have some good thoughts. But he did keep South Dakota State at number 1. Montana State goes to number 2. North Dakota State at 3. He goes at Sacramento State 4. William Mary 5. Holy Cross moves up to 6. Incarnate Word 7, and Samford rounds out with 8. So pretty interesting concept here of the 8 seeds here. What sticks out to you right away with the 1 through 8 in Stan's article?
Well, I can see, again, South Dakota State hasn't done anything to lose that number 1 seed. But honestly, I think the best team in FCS right now is Montana State, as my hat will display there to you. I think the Bobcats from about mid-October on, they have played the most consistent, best brand of football at the FCS level. Samford certainly losing their starting quarterback. It looks like he's not going to play against North Dakota State, so I can see why they dropped down so low. I'm a little curious as to why Holy Cross still doesn't get a whole lot of love. But I think overall, I think he was pretty spot on. Incarnate Word is I hate to say it's a one-trick pony because, they have the best quarterback left, I think, in the playoffs. But I think overall, I think it was a great article. And he made some really, really good points. And what I found interesting was when he talked about South Dakota State, it was just like four lines because, okay, they're the number 1 team in the country. What else do you want me to say about it? Nothing's really moving much. But I thought it was a really great article. If folks out there that follow FCS or just are curious about, now that the playoffs have started, I really do encourage you to go and read the article because it was a really interesting take. And I didn't look at any of the comments. I don't know if you did, Christian, at all, but I would imagine he got some pretty interesting comments in that article.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. I didn't check them out as well. We pay attention to all the comments here on SlasherU. It usually takes up most of my time because we do have some great listeners over on SlasherU. But I'm interested about the Holy Cross ranking as well. I thought that one was interesting. In his article, he states that the reason that there was a balance, obviously, that they were off the best start in program history, with Holy Cross still being undefeated, but they said that they can do it without a successful passing attack. Now, even though Matt Sluka is one of the best quarterbacks we've seen in Holy Cross, it's more on the running game, not the passing side. For example, Sluka only completed 6 passes last week. So that's his argument, and I really can't disagree too much about it. I understand it. I think he makes some very good points. We're going to put that article in our episode description below. So if you're interested and you want to check it out and then you want to leave a comment for us and join the discussion, please do so. And shout out to Stan Beckton here for that really good article at NCAA.com. All right, let's check out these games here. We got 4 fantastic games, 3 on Friday night and 1 on Saturday at noon. No FBS games are during these times. So there is no reason why you cannot watch these games. For example, the game on Saturday is at noon. The Army-Navy game's at 3. You have plenty of time to get that in there. Use that game as a nice warm-up for getting your dips and your meatball sandwiches ready to go for that Army-Navy game. It's a good one to have on the background because you're going to learn a lot about those teams. But let's start off with the games on Friday night, and we'll go in order. We got a game at 7 o'clock Eastern on ESPN2 and ESPN Plus, as well as NCAA.com. Samford taking on North Dakota State. Now, according to Becton's rankings, Samford would be the number 8 one on this one. North Dakota State would be number 3. I'm looking forward to this game. We actually got lines here too, so I'm going to put them out there. We don't have to, make our picks, but I'm going to put them out here. North Dakota State, a minus 16.5 point favorite, pretty high on that one. North Dakota State 10-2, Samford 11-1. But as you stated earlier, Steve, they're without their starting quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that was probably that final nail in the Samford coffin for this season. They had a great year. I mean, I think they outperformed expectations all season long. And Michael Hires is a good quarterback. I wouldn't say he's a great quarterback, but he's a good quarterback. But they looked really lost against Southeast Louisiana after he went out of the game, and they barely hung on to beat Southeast Louisiana in overtime. You look at North Dakota State, and remember, they were the number 1 team in the country for the early part of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a score to settle, you could say, no pun intended. I mean, I think they want to prove that they may indeed be still the best team in FCS. They put away a very good Montana team, primarily by running the ball just down the throats of the Grizz. Kobe Johnson had 206 yards, 2 touchdowns, including a 75-yarder. Tamarick Williams ran for 101. He had a 68-yard touchdown run. And Cam Miller is a really interesting mobile kind of quarterback. He ran for 81 yards. He only threw for 58 yards, but if you're putting up that kind of rushing performance, that's smart not to put yourself potentially in danger. Not that Cam Miller throws a lot of interceptions, but if you're running the ball that effectively and you can control the clock, why mess with success? But you don't see too many 200-yard games in any playoff game, really. So Kobe Johnson, hats off to him on that one. I mean, that was really, really terrific. I see North Dakota State covering this. I mean, since we have the lines, we don't always have lines for FCS games. I can see North Dakota State covering this game. Again, not a knock on Samford. Looks like their quarterback's not going to be back. And I just don't think they have the defense that's going to slow down that North Dakota State running game.
Yeah, they just sneaked by Southeastern Louisiana in final overtime, 48 for week. Quincy Crittenden did come in to play quarterback. He is a freshman. I mean, on the stat line, it was fantastic for him. He threw for 314 and 4 touchdowns, and he rushed for the overtime winner, and rushed for 94 yards on the ground. He produced over 400 yards of total offense. Just him alone. He was responsible for 5 touchdowns as well. I'm interested to see what it will be like this week for Quincy to be in practice as a starting quarterback, to have the game plan for him. I'm interested to see how that's going to work for Samford. I want to see if that's going to be the case. Now, keep this in mind. Samford's only loss this season is to the number 1 team, not in FCS, in FBS, the Georgia Bulldogs. They lost. The only loss they have is to University of Georgia here. I am leaning towards North Dakota State as well, though. I mean, there's just so much on the line, and it's hard to put it on a freshman that's going to be starting his first ever game in the quarterfinals. So again, I'm interested to see how he will act and how the adjustments will be made and the game plan that's going to be put out in front of him. But North Dakota State is just that good of a team. All right, let's get into the next one here. We got a late slate for the Eastern Coast time, 10:15 Eastern on ESPN2 and ESPN Plus. William & Mary taking on Montana State. This one should be pretty good. Both teams 11-1 in this one. We just saw William & Mary take care of their game last week. It was basically a blowout the whole time. Montana State, though, little different in that one. Montana State looked good for the most of it. You think Montana State is the best team remaining, Steve? I know you talked about that earlier. What's your thoughts on this game moving into at 10:15 Eastern time in this quarterfinal game?
Well, I'm going to drink as much coffee as I possibly can because I want to stay up and I want to watch this game. William and Mary. I mean, if you have a team that scores 54 points, in a playoff game, I mean, you need to take notice. And William and Mary they can light up the scoreboard. They've got a terrific offense. Now, I would say that they did that at the expense of a Gardner-Webb team that I don't think had the caliber of defensive talent that could slow down the Tribe. I mean, William and Mary's had a terrific, terrific year. I look at Darius Wilson, he's a dynamic quarterback. He can get the job done with his arms and his legs. But I really think William and Mary's run ends in Missoula, because I think they don't have any answers for Montana State's running game. Last week against a tough Weber State side, they had 3 players rush for more than 90 yards. They finished the season really, really strong, as I alluded to earlier, in the Big Sky Conference, which is probably the best conference this year, in the FCS. I mean, you can argue Missouri Valley Conference, but I think, over the course, especially of the last 4 to 6 weeks, I think the Big Sky kind of set themselves apart. A big reason why I think Montana State is now the best team left in FCS is they've got their longtime star running back, Isaiah Ifonse. He played his first game in a long time, in over a year. I had a really serious knee injury. He looked really, really good. So that, I think, is just yet another weapon on the ground where Montana State can really keep things fresh. We've seen that with a lot of teams, both FBS and FCS, where if they've got a stable of running backs and they can keep running them in and out, they can just keep running the ball and moving the ball on the ground. So I would imagine Montana State's going to do its best to try to keep William and Mary's offense off the field the best they can. Now, both teams could easily put up 500 yards in any given game. I don't see this happening for William and Mary against Montana State. To these eyes, everything that I needed to see about Montana State, the exclamation point was last week, but when they were in that big spotlight for College Game Day, and they just dismantled their cross-state rivalries.
Yeah, 55-21. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, and Montana was an FCS playoff team. All right. So when that happens, that tells me that everything is clicking, on all cylinders here. So the line here is, what was it, 11?
No, 7.5 in favor of
7.5. Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, so I guess people are buying into what William and Mary did to Gardner-Webb. And again, William and Mary, they've got a great offense. They just find unique ways to score points too. Like in situations that you would never think. So somehow they break off a big run, or they have a pass that's maybe just supposed to be getting up yards with the first down, but the receiver breaks a tackle or jukes his way and comes in for a big score. So I mean there could be some nervous moments for Montana State, but I mean I'm giving the points and I'm taking Montana State.
Yeah, I'm going to go on the other side here. I'm leaning towards the Tribe. I really like what Mike Lennon's done with this squad. And I am drinking the Kool-Aid about what I've seen with Gardner-Webb. That 54-14 win last week was an absolute beating. And what they had to do to get that bye in the Colonial with that last week win over Richmond, that 37-26 win. What I've seen in the last few weeks from this team is enough for me to say I'm picking this squad. However, Montana State, I mean, fantastic. You want to go back a few weeks. This is the same team that put 72 points up on Cal Poly the week before College Game Day, right? So this is going to be a fantastic game. I'm with you. Get that coffee in good. Inject it in your veins if you have to, because this is worth staying up for that one. Again, 10:15, ESPN2 and ESPN Plus, and as well as NCAA.com. William and Mary taking on Montana State. This one is probably going to be the best game of Friday night, in my opinion. We got one more on the slate here. This one starts at 10:30 Eastern time on ESPN Plus. Incarnate Word taking on Sacramento State. Sacramento State still unbeaten. However, it was pretty close last week in that one. Now, I know you stated before we talked a little off air, you said, they were beat. They should have been beat last week against Richmond. Incarnate Word as well had a pretty tough go. Both these teams just snuck into the quarterfinals. It's pretty interesting that they're taking on each other, Steve.
Yeah, and then with Sacramento State, when we first did just a generic preview of the FCS playoff bracket, I had said Sacramento State is going to win it all. And that's not a knock against South Dakota State or any other team. But what I saw in that game against Richmond really disheartened me. And I know the conditions were terrible. It was a steady rain. It was really a heavy rain, in the third quarter on. But they live and die by the run, and they just couldn't, and they died. Okay, they were averaging about 2 yards a carry in that game. Their quarterback, when they had to try to go through it, he threw you 3 interceptions. Again, conditions not great, but still, there were a lot of people that were doing articles or reviewing Sacramento State and even questioning why they were a 2 seed despite their terrific record because of some inconsistent and some sloppy play. So based on what I saw, I'm a little concerned that Sacramento State can live up to that number 2 seed. And Incarnate Word has the best quarterback remaining in the FCS. Lindsey Scott Jr. threw for 5 scores. Now he did technically throw. I saw that in the preview article. I had to laugh. He did technically throw for 6 because he did throw a pick. He did throw a pick 6, but Furman has impressed us. I mean, we've talked about Furman a couple times,
certainly
during the course of the season, and Incarnate Word found a way to keep Furman off the board for the most part, at critical times. And I think with the quarterback play, I really think that Incarnate Word is going to keep that magic, that San Antonio magic going, because you've got Division III Trinity's undefeated. You've got RUTSA Roadrunners and Incarnate Word. They've been there before. I mean, they're not strangers to big games, and they're certainly not strangers to depending, on a quarterback. I think Scott is going to do enough, and it's probably going to lead them to a late drive. And I really think that Incarnate Word is going to nip Sacramento State there with probably a minute or 2 left in the game, and that'll be enough.
Scott threw 49 passing attempts last week. I can see that happening again. I can see them being very pass heavy against the Sacramento State team. They might have to. The over-under on this game is 76.5 points. That's how high this one is, because both these teams can put up points. I think that is something that to keep in mind. Sacramento State actually is a 6-point favorite, so I know you'd be in favor of taking Incarnate Word here.
Yes.
Sacramento State, though, what we saw last week against Richmond, but then what we've seen in games past, right? We've seen them against Weber State look really good. They played really well against Idaho. Both of those were 3-point wins, but they were really tough wins. And those were playoff teams this year as well. The Richmond game, though, as you mentioned, they just got snuck by in this one. I'm with you. I think we can get some more San Antonio magic in here and see Incarnate Word get a win. I'm looking forward to maybe seeing them in the semifinals. That'd be pretty cool. All right, moving into Saturday, and to me, I think this is the FCS game of the week. I'm glad they put it on Saturday. A nice warm-up for the Army-Navy game, which I'm absolutely stoked for. Undefeated Holy Cross taking on South Dakota State, the consensus number 1 throughout the FCS right now. They are currently a 15.5-point favorite, Steve. I know that you are huge on Holy Cross here. Can the upset happen? That's what I want to know. Is it possible? Do you think it will happen? We're going to get this game at noon on ESPN and ESPN+.
It's certainly possible. Holy Cross Holy Cross is a lot like TCU. They just find ways to win games. They do what it takes, whether it be big defensive stops. And again, they've had some problems with some leaky defensive efforts from time to time. But again, they went 12-0. They beat University of Buffalo. They've won 20 of their last 21 games. And I think the Crusaders sort of have a chip on their shoulder, because I think they really feel they have not gotten the respect that they deserve. And I agree, they should have been seated higher than 8. As many great teams that we've talked about here, Holy Cross should have been seated higher. I think that reseeding of number 6 in the NCAA.com article, I think that's about right. I might have even gone as high as 5 because they just, you talked about Matt Sluka earlier. He's a 1,000-yard rusher. They grind out 243 yards a game. South Dakota State has fared well against mobile quarterback. We just talked about Cam Miller at North Dakota State, and they kept him relatively contained as much as you can when they beat them to take over the number 1 ranking in the country. I really like the Jackrabbits offensive line. I like their defensive front 4, and I like their linebacking core. I think that they're just going to bend and not break in a lot of situations where maybe the Crusaders have been used to their opponents breaking because of the pressure that they can bring, on the run game. It'll be interesting to see if they elect to try to throw. Sluka has a pretty good arm. He's relatively accurate, but again, his main weapon is his legs. When you rush for 1,000 yards and you're a quarterback, you're in rarefied air there. I'm going to go South Dakota State on this one. They squashed Delaware.
Put the hurt on Delaware.
Yeah, they just gave them no breathing room. And honestly, I want to say their first field goal was based on a turnover mistake. Then they had another field goal, so all 6 points pretty much happened in the first half. And Delaware is no stranger to FCS playoff games, so the coaching staff, even the entire roster, they've been there. So it's not a matter of them being, overwhelmed by the bright lights or whatever. South Dakota State just shut them down. They beat them by 36. So that tells me that they have enough on the defensive end to maybe keep the Crusaders in check to the point where, even though I think it's going to be a very entertaining game, you're going to see probably the 2 best coached teams in these playoffs. They're very disciplined teams, but I'm going to go with South Dakota State in this one, as much as it breaks my heart because I've been screaming about Holy Cross all season. I really think South Dakota State is just too much.
I think if Holy Cross wants to have a chance to win this game, their game plan has to be creative, because just like we mentioned last week, they only threw 6 passing attempts. Well, South Dakota State, in that complete massacre against Delaware, they held Delaware to 64 yards rushing on 37 attempts. That's under 2 yards per carry. Now, I think that we will see some better luck of Holy Cross, but that's just something to keep in mind in what that could come for the Crusaders here. I think they got to be creative. They probably have to throw the ball more than 6 times, and they have to be efficient when they do so. I also think that they are going to have to win the turnover battle. We saw that last week against New Hampshire. They were +4 in turnover margin. They had 5 turnovers against New Hampshire. So that's something that they must do. And that's something that South Dakota State is very good at not letting happen. They only had 1 turnover in the game against Delaware. Their quarterback's only thrown 5 picks all year. So they're going to have to really be creative and really make some mistakes that we haven't seen happen too much from the Jackrabbits. I'm with you. I think South Dakota State wins this game, but I do think it is going to be the game of the week. I'm really interested in this one. Let us know your thoughts about all the games we've covered in this one, as the quarterfinals of the FCS playoffs are coming at you Friday and Saturday. It's going to be fantastic. We're looking forward to it. We will recap this here on Monday before we get going into the semifinals and the finals. This is where it's at, folks. We got FCS playoffs coming at you. Let us know your thoughts in the comment description below. Hit like and subscribe while you're there. And thanks for watching SlasherU.